Okay, we're good.
All right, let's get this thing going. Hey everyone, welcome to OWASP DC. First things first, we're going to do a little bit of business, then we'll get down to the lecture. First thing, I guess, Andy, did you want to come up and talk? All right. Andy's from Blue Canopy. They very, very nicely supply the pizza and beers today. So.
So I'm Andy Stevenson. I'm with Blue Canopy. We're an IT consulting firm based in Reston. We have a couple of people here. If you're not with Blue Canopy, raise your hand.
Raise the office.
Yeah, exactly. So about half our business is straight cybersecurity, and we also do a whole lot of development. So you can talk to just about everybody here who's with Blue Canopy. Go for it.
Thank you again.
The next shout out we've got to give is for Uber offices, the wonderful people that are volunteer to host us every single time, which is really nice of them. Has nothing to do with Uber, the like driving around people around company, but they're really awesome. And if you need temporary office space, temporary workspace, whatever, little tiny stuff, they're awesome. They've been really, really nice to us. If you need bathrooms, that's when you came in. The key is attached to like a big water bottle. Help yourself. The bathrooms are out by the elevator. Wi-Fi key, if you haven't already figured it out, is up here. All right. So raise your hands if this is your first OWASP meeting. Okay. Nice. Well, welcome. If you haven't heard, OWASP is a global 501c3 organization kind of dedicated to improving software security or application security worldwide. There's a whole bunch of local chapters. There's a whole bunch of people doing a whole bunch of stuff. It's got local chapter events. There's conferences. There's a lot of projects as well, documentation, software that people have written. There's a lot of resources that are out there if you're interested in learning more or getting tools or working on your own policy work or whatever out there on the main website. It's owasp.org. But again, a lot of the actual like action, really interesting things that happens is down at the local level at all the hundreds of chapter events that meet on a regular basis. So thank you all for coming and really appreciate it. So upcoming events, we do meet on the first Wednesday of every month. We try to. August is going to be a little bit different because DEF CON and a lot of us are going to be gone. So we're going to meet the second Wednesday that week, that month. But we're going to be going through the rest of the year. We've got speakers lined up through September at this point. October and November are kind of a little bit up in the air, so if you have any brilliant ideas for presentations. And December, we usually have a social with the OWASP Northern Virginia chapter. That'll be someplace in near Virginia area for those of us that live in the DC area. It's not too far away. Next month, we're going to have John Callahan talking about his SQL Viking SQL injection exploit tool, which is pretty cool. He's spoken here before, and he's a pretty smart guy. So, with no further ado, I'm going to pass it over to David to talk about iOS authentication.
All right.
So, thanks.
All right. I've never given a talk about coding, so this is going to be kind of strange for me. So if I look awkward, it's because I am. David Schultz, I work for NCC Group. We used to be Intrepidus Group, but then we got bought, and now after 2.5 years, we're kind of folding all of our groups together into one company. We're calling ourselves NCC. I do mostly iOS application security, some web app testing. This is strange. I'll look at that too. You know what I'm talking about. I also like crypto puzzles. I do a lot of cryptography puzzles. I've run the puzzle at ChumuCon for the last few years, and several others. Spent a lot of my years as a government contractor, so I've got kind of I've tried not to become completely risk avoidant, but there's a little bit of that kind of seeps through, so you'll see some of that in some of the things that I say. A lot of what I put out here is almost idealized kind of an approach to security. Some of it is And we try not to, when we do tests, to say, oh, this is horrible, you can't do this because it's just wrong, and even if there's no real risk. You do try to understand the risk, but sometimes that kind of falls a little bit harder on the risk side. Anyway, you'll see that as we go through. So just a quick overview of what we'll talk about. Go straight into it. There are millions of apps available in the App Store for iOS, just all kinds. And most of them are generally completely standalone. They're things like games or maybe a camera or things like that don't really have much in terms of private data back out on some kind of server. But there's an awful lot, obviously, that do access the internet and send sensitive information over the net. Banks, healthcare apps, anything work-related, just hundreds of these. And a lot of these will also have some kind of a web-based interface. So a lot of times, frequently you'll have the same password, almost always the same password for the mobile app that you'll have for the web app. So if you can compromise one, then you've got access into the other. And frequently, although it's changing, frequently the website will have more features than the mobile side just because you've got a little bit more power in the desktop. So if you can compromise a weaker mobile app, you can then get a lot more information out of the website, for example. So that's just one reason why this is kind of an interesting thing. That's a good one. So one obvious risk is if you leave an unlocked phone somewhere, if you're at a coffee shop, Starbucks, of course, is the canonical example, and you leave your phone there, somebody who picks up the phone can sometimes extract data from the phone. That's getting actually more difficult now on iPhones with iOS 8.3, and I'll describe a little bit that later. But they could directly extract data from the phone. They could go a little bit farther if they're sophisticated and actually configure a proxy on it, and now everything that you do is going through it. So they can install the proxy, start launching some apps and collect the data from the network right there, just straight off the wire, or not wire, off the wireless. And of course, if the phone's jailbroken, then all bets are off. They've got to be on. But even if it's not lost or stolen, you might still be able to man the middle using a public Wi-Fi. So again, if you're at a Starbucks and you're able to convince the person to jump onto your network as opposed to the Starbucks network, you might still be able to get some information out of that. So one question that I had, and this is the question that we answer frequently throughout my job in assessing iOS applications, is just how exposed is an application? What kinds of things can you do that's good, that's bad, etc. And when we review applications, we focus on, we do the whole thing, we look at all aspects of it. So what I'm going to do here is talk about how I focused on just authentication for a series of apps, just to see, in general, how apps are authenticating today. So it's just that one single vector for authentication. I looked at a cross-section of apps, figured out how do they authenticate, are they doing anything bad, are they doing anything better, is there anything exceptionally good or exceptionally bad? So how do I select apps? Well, I'm on my 4th iPhone in the past 6 years. And I've accumulated, as you might expect, many applications. I think I have over 230 there on my phone. I probably added a half dozen since I wrote this talk. And that's not going to talk about the ones I've deleted. So just even thinking about the apps that I use on a regular basis is a reasonably good cross-section of applications. Now, I'm not going to have everything. There's certainly some things that I don't use, some classes of apps that I don't really interact much with. But in general, it's at least a starting point. But yeah, it's definitely not exactly a pure sample from a research standpoint. So from that 230 apps, I dropped off things that didn't have any obvious network services. Like I said, calendars, calculator apps, things like that. Not calendars, calculators or games. I didn't look at things that required only services that were based straight out of the OS, like the iCloud stuff. I didn't look at things that used third-party services. So if you've got an application that can communicate through the Twitter login on the phone and tweet out, you just got a high score. I didn't look at that interface. Found a few apps on my phones. There were a few apps on my phone that did things like SSH or VNC or talk to some other local servers. I didn't look at those because though there is a little bit of a security vector there, it's still contained entirely within my networking. Now I'm looking at a totally different sort of paradigm. And then there's also some other things, some anonymous services, and I didn't actually have logins for that I installed and never actually used, or I only used in a guest mode. And if there was anything that I had that was no longer in the App Store, I also dropped that off because I wanted to be able to get current versions of it. So what was left was about 50 apps. of those, 7 couldn't be intercepted. Let me tell you how I'm intercepting these. I'm using something called Burp Suite, which many of you, probably a lot of you know about. I remember what my audience is. And there were about 7 or so of them that would not actually talk to Burp. The network traffic that they were using was using underlying API calls that were ignoring the proxy configurations. And I didn't have a lot of time to work at this, and this is all just kind of slack time. So I couldn't really dig too deep on this. If this was obviously an assessment for a customer, we'd figure out how to get the data. So I ended up looking at about 40 apps. I had bank, healthcare, I had travel, I had some cloud storage, I had some social networking, a lot of different things on there. I'm not going to go into the exact applications because this isn't a he said, she said, this isn't a tell-all about what apps I found. I will mention one later. But in general, I'm not here to endorse any app, I'm not here to condemn any app. I'm just looking for to get a cross-section, to get a feel for how things are doing. It's really a statistical survey. And I also, again, didn't spend a huge amount of time, just an hour or so per app, looking at what they were, what they did. So how it worked, I used the man-in-the-middle proxy, the Burp proxy, and the first pass that I did, I used an untrusted root certificate. Mostly just to see if the apps even noticed that I was using a bad certificate. This is just a clumsy man-in-the-middle attacker who's seeing SSL traffic coming through and just spitting it right back with a bad cert. And then I used the man-in-the-middle proxy. I used it with a trusted cert to see whether the forged cert works. Most of the time it did. So it's a cert that's been trusted by the phone because I incorporated the certificate authority cert that came out of Burp. So basically what happens is the phone makes a connection, Burp says you're connecting to Google, it forges a cert for Google, signs it itself, spits it back. And because you trusted the root cert off of Burp, it trusts all those other certs. Most of the times, those work just fine. So that's where I did most of my work. And then after I'd done all this, I kind of set it aside for a week or so and then came back and relaunched them all again just to see if they still behave the same way. Also tested them again with missing CA cert just to see if the behavior is a little different now that it's actually had a successful authentication and has some kind of data inside. What I was looking for, I wanted to see how the initial authentication happened, see how credentials were passed from the user, you're protecting your user ID and your password, how those credentials are passed up to the server at the first time, see how they're passed every time. So if you are using the app, there's something going on with every single packet. If you leave the app and come back an hour later or a day later, does it re-authenticate? Does it keep using the same tokens? If you quit it, can it automatically log in? And by quit, I mean actually force quit. So actually force quitting the app or rebooting the phone. Do I then need to re-enter the password or does it have it stored obviously somehow? And then how is it stored? Is the password being stored or is there a token? It's being stored well. These are all the questions I was looking at. So to summarize the goals here, I wanted to see if there's a secure network, if there's a secure login, if sessions are secure, and if the storage is secure. But I'm not looking for specific flaws. I found a few weaknesses. I found one that actually allowed you to enumerate personal information from an agency, from a customer using just the email addresses of other users. But generally, I wasn't looking for bugs or flaws per se. I wasn't looking for server-side issues. I wasn't testing the security app itself. I didn't reverse engineer it. And I didn't look at any authentication, any follow-up stuff. So if it was an application that, say, a travel app, and you could look up flight schedules or something like that, and then buy a ticket and ask you for a password again at that point. I didn't look that deep. I just looked at the main general authentication throughout the app. I did come up with some ideas for future talks as I was going through here. So we were just saying, you need talks this fall. One interesting thing was analytics providers. An awful lot of these applications use Crashlytics, Flurry, Hockey, those kinds of things to collect usage statistics on the app. That they just entered this screen, or they spent this much time in that portion of the app, or this thing broke. Many of them supported more than one of these even. And a good question is, what kind of data is being sent to these? The test that I did just recently, just in the last couple of weeks, we were looking at, and they were using one of those analytics providers, and they were actually sending the OAuth authentication token for the application to the third-party analytics service. Can't imagine why that would be happening, but obviously there's a data leak there that probably shouldn't have been going on. So that, I think, would be an interesting survey to see what things are going on. And then just general application security review, kind of taking what I did and going out the next step to more general security practices. I'd be kind of curious to see how those come out. So the general process that I used, I had an iPhone 5C running iOS 8.1, installed all the apps straight from the App Store. There's only one app that's already on that phone. This is one I use primarily for testing. So almost all but one of the apps were fresh and installed. I would monitor the syslog and varlog syslog. I included one of the Cydia tweaks that wrote all the nslog output to syslog, so I got additional information there. And then intercept the traffic, like I said, using Burp Suite. Launch it, see how it goes, wander around the app, play with it, exercise all the different features. Then I kill it, launch it again. Look in the keychain, look in the sandbox, look at all the data that's being stored. So that's more or less the process I would do for each app, and I've got massive spreadsheets with columns and diagrams and stuff to track it all. So the first target that I was looking at here, trying to see if the network usage was secure. Here we're looking at any kind of credential stealing attack. Somebody who's using public Wi-Fi, the attacker attacks a connection again. Like I said, if you convince somebody at Starbucks to use your Wi-Fi instead of the store's Wi-Fi, they might be able to get stuff there. Or again, if there's an unlocked device, the attacker installs a proxy, points it to his own laptop, and then he just runs burp and sucks all the data off himself as he goes through all the different apps. Good design for an application for a secure network. Obviously, using TLS would be good. If the certificate you receive back is untrusted, it's good to refuse it. This blocks the naive man-in-the-middle attacker. This blocks somebody who's just kind of giving you bad stuff. If the cert looks valid, that is to say, if it's been signed by a certificate authority that your phone trusts, either because you were dumb enough to install the attacker's root CA, or because maybe a CA got compromised, like all the compromises we've seen in the past for DigiNotar and stuff like that, or even bugs. If you see the connection that looks like a valid cert, but it's not the cert you expect, you should refuse that too. We call that cert pin. And you'll find out how many apps use that. Why is TLS so important? This is an interesting bit that I discovered as I was kind of collecting background data for this. Obviously, most authentication methods, you're going to rely on TLS to secure things, but I didn't realize the degree of that reliance is actually in the spec. Well, not in the spec, but it was kind of in the driving forces behind OWASP 2. And the quote here is from somebody who wrote a good set of pages about OWASP 2 Simplified. And basically said that OAuth 1, while very powerful, confused the hell out of developers, to the point that it was very difficult to learn how it worked by simply copying and pasting examples, sending them through curl, doing really quick walkthroughs to understand it. It was just very difficult because all the data has to be individually signed and wrapped and all kinds of stuff like that. So basically they said, okay, that's way too complicated. We're just going to do this and trust SSL. So this bothered me, so I'm going to repeat it. Dynamic tokens confuse developers, so we'll rely on TLS. And that's bad because, as I was just saying, the TLS is not a guaranteed security. There have been CA compromises, there are bugs. How many bugs in OpenSSL have we seen in the last year alone? And then there's also forced proxy use. This was actually when I said it back when I gave this talk back at ShmooCon, how many people in the audience raised their hand because they flew to the con, might have used Wi-Fi on the plane. A lot of times they'll force you to accept a cert, and they've got forced proxy use on the airplane. So you may not even have a secure connection anyway because the people that are giving you your Wi-Fi are doing a man-in-the-middle attack themselves. So the official stance, the official philosophy behind OAuth 2 is make the authentication simple, rely on TLS. I kind of like the opposite. And this is where I was saying before that sometimes my risk avoidance kicks into high gear. Use TLS absolutely, but don't rely on it. I think you should always assume that your communications can be intercepted and write your code such that it doesn't matter. The TLS will give you a good level of security against a casual attacker, but somebody who's really trying to get in, it just worries me that there are too many ways around it. So, the actual data. Of the 40 apps that I looked at, for the first pass, I had no CA certificates, so it was going through Burp, spinning back just a fake certificate for the site, but it was a completely unsigned, completely untrusted cert for each site. 38 of the 8 out of the 40 failed with some kind of error, and I'll describe the errors in a moment. One of the apps didn't care. It just went right on through just fine. And one of the apps didn't even use TLS. It was all over HTTP, including the password. The user experience here was terrible. I had 44 error messages that just had a general network error, 7 that were general prompt, which is patently false because you haven't even looked at the credentials yet. They have no idea whether your credentials are right or not. It didn't even accept the connection. 4 had the always helpful NS URL error domain -1012, and one app out of 40 had actually a helpful, accurate, useful message. So that was my favorite. Oops, we're currently experiencing a number of technical difficulties within our app. We are actively working to resolve these issues. We're turning up to full functionality as soon as possible. Thank you for your patience. Yeah, that's a crock of stuff.
At least they know they're bugging.
And this is what they look like. Sorry, it looks like something went wrong. Network connectivity may be poor. Network connectivity is fine. I'm just stealing the network. That's the only one that I liked. Cannot establish a secure sync connection. Please update the app or check the website for updates. To protect your password data and privacy, Overcast refuses to connect with reduced security. It's telling you what's happening, it's telling you why it's happening, and it's telling you what it's going to do about it, which is nothing. You're not going to get to use the app. That's perfect. That's exactly the kind of app or message we should be seeing. And it's a podcast app. Why is a podcast app doing this right and a bank app isn't? So major kudos for caring enough about your customers' podcast synchronization. So the 38 apps that were remaining, remember there were 2. One was using HTTP and one didn't care about the bad cert. So the other 38, 34 of them worked fine once I installed the burp certificate authority. So now when it's being man in the middle, the cert that comes back looks real because it's being signed by a cert that we've trusted on the phone. 2 apps appeared to be pinned, but I was able to use Snoop It, which is an app on jailbroken iPhones that allows you to basically bypass cert pinning, among other things. So 2 of them were pinned and I was able to get around it. One looked like it pinned and I couldn't bypass it at all, and another one looked like it might have even been certificate based. So instead of using, instead of using just user authentication, it looked like it was actually requiring certificates from the client app back to the server. So again, of all these apps, 34 were fine. 2 I bypassed. That gives me 36 apps that I can actually work with because the 2 that were pinned I couldn't bypass. I had to drop. And then the 2 before that didn't care. So I got 38 apps in. So now I can start looking at the fun stuff. That was just does the work at the network level. Now I want to see how the logins work. So I was looking here to see, an attacker in this situation, if they're able to circumvent some kind of controls, like if they circumvent the lock screen on the phone because you left it unlocked, or if they're trying to steal the password off the network, if you're using the app, the password elsewhere, so they steal the password, they use it elsewhere. Good design here, never storing the password. If you can avoid it, don't send the password. It's very rare that I can find an app that actually has an authentication sequence that doesn't send a password at some point. Ideally storing some kind of hash or refresh token in the app. See a lot of that. Most applications pass the plain text user ID. Now it's in the TLS wrapper, so it's still encrypted. But once you're inside that, once you've decrypted all that, the password is just right there. The vast majority of them sent the data in a body using a post command. A handful of them sent it just at the HTTP headers, or handful sent the headers. 2 weren't even base64 encoded. It was just a header with password : and password, user ID : user ID. 2 of them sent passwords in the URL. One was the user ID and the MD5 hash password. Another one was human readable plain text. So password equals and then the password text. A few of them passed secondary credentials over the post, like an access to answer to security questions or 2-step verification. So those might come in second or third back and forth transactions, communications, exchanges. They might come in subsequent exchanges with the server. Lots of data formats. We've got one that's just basically URL looking, username equals something, password equals something. That was a get parameter. A lot of them are JSON format. This one here, this is how I knew it was an MD5 password hash because it says so. Here's the one, username and password just as an HTTP header. They didn't even capitalize it for some reason. They got an OAuth, big OAuth authentication. And then a couple even had full-blown XML. At least it wasn't the, what was it, IBM came up with a spec recently for representing JSON as XML, which was, at least they didn't go that far. There were a few that were very obfuscated. One was so obfuscated it was actually encrypted. A couple were like that. A few used some kind of a binary data structure, so I couldn't just simply look at the JSON directly. I had to kind of parse it out and figure out what they are. A couple used GZIP compression, so the 60-byte JSON string is compressed down to 40 bytes in GZIP. Only about 5 apps total were like this. They were almost all human readable like that. Got a couple that used a couple of cool things. The encrypted password, the application sends you user ID to the server. The server responds with, okay, great, he's in the system, I guess, and then here's a key. Now the application takes your password, encrypts it with that key, sends it back up. An attacker who only gets that one packet is at luck because they can't decrypt it. It's been encrypted. Of course, if they can grab that packet, they can probably grab the entire exchange and they saw the key code guy in the first place. So it doesn't give you a huge amount of support, but it's still there. They're trying. They're trying. 2 of them appeared like they were completely encrypted all the way through, but I wasn't positive because I didn't have time to really break it and figure that one out. Another one actually sent a private certificate, a private key on the initial login, and then all subsequent traffic included a signature based on that private key. So that was kind of nice to see. Saw some dumb things. There was one app that actually had autocorrects enabled in the username field. And it took me forever to get that one, because every time I type in my user ID and I hit tab to the next one, I go back and the user ID would be wrong. So what the hell, I go back, change it, come back to the next thing. It kept autocorrecting my password. It was not fun. It took me like I said, about 5 tries before I realized what was going on. Because sometimes you're just typing it fast, and you hit the thing, you go to the next thing, you hit it, and it doesn't work, and you go back and you see your field with the wrong name. I don't know, that was stupid. So that was looking at the initial authentication. So now, once you've authenticated and you've got a session established, how is the app communicating your current session data back to the server? Again, if an attacker is able to circumvent controls, can they steal the tokens from the connection and use them elsewhere on the web or in another app on another phone, etc. Good design here is if the app has a revocable token where the user can deauthorize a device, so you can say, oh, my phone was stolen, let's disable my iPhone, so you log into the website, say this account is no longer valid. If you've got a dynamic token that can prevent replay attacks, that kind of works. There's also ways around it. So you have a token that can only be used once. You send it, and then the server responds. If somebody grabs that token, they can't reuse it because the server recognizes it's already been used. But depending on how their attack is working, if they're passively observing, they can't do anything. If they're actually in the middle, you make the request, they stop it, return an error, then they get out of the way. You make a second request with a new token. That request goes through. He's still got a token that was never accepted by the server. He can go off and send that himself on a packet. The best way, obviously, is to use some kind of signature-based request because now the data within the request is now signed by something the server trusts, and so you can't alter the packet. Can also help remove this that we're using an unused token. So the questions I had here were how were requests authenticated as the app's being used? 2 of them sent the password every single time. So every single request you went out, it had HTTP header with the base 64 encoded or sometimes not encoded, but the password was sent every single time. So if you can intercept that packet, you've got the password, you can reuse that right away to your heart's content. Most of them sent some kind of a token. Many of them were some kind of OAuth v1 or OAuth v2 variants. And the tokens went in lots of different places. Sometimes URL parameters, most of the time cookies or headers. A lot of times also in the post request box. So just everywhere. That earlier screenshot I showed you with all the different authentication things. it was just as varied for tokens. Most tokens are just binary. They're literally just a random binary string. But a couple of them decoded to ASCII text. One of them looked like, and I spent some time, probably more time on this than I should have. But it was a base 64 encoding of a client ID, a UID, some number I couldn't recognize, the number one, a Unix timestamp, a 0, and then something else I couldn't figure out. The last block looked like it was an MD5 hash of the whole thing. This might give you something you can maybe brute force a server-side secret, I don't know. It's fun and it's tempting to put information into tokens like that because it's convenient, but in the end, it's probably not the safest approach to do it because if somebody can get that and decode it, they can start brute forcing the secrets, then they can make a token for anything, which is why I spent so much time playing with that when I shouldn't have. I also looked at renewed authentication. So when you force quit the app or your phone reboots or you don't touch it for a month and you come back, has the token expired? I didn't have time to really sit there and figure out, okay, this app just expired here because obviously if you test it and it works, now you've just reset the expiration point. So I couldn't test expiration times. When you did this, a few apps just sent the user ID and password again, so it obviously had a password stored on the phone somewhere. A few of them actually asked the user to re-enter some credentials. A couple asked for the password. I think one asked for the password and the user ID, but retained absolutely nothing on the phone. Most of them, there's a token that was stored somewhere on the device, and it just resent that. But even the apps that stored a token still had credentials of some form stored on the phone. Almost all of them. There's one app that actually stored, it asked for a password each time, but rather than storing your user ID on the device, it stored an encrypted version of the user ID. So there was some kind of a server-side key that the app never sees, and it stored, and when you first logged in, it sent back, okay, give me your password, and by the way, here's an encrypted version of your user ID, and the first 3 letters are DSC for my username or something like that. Then when you log in, you just see select your user ID, DSC, ******, and you pick that, and it sends the encrypted user ID and goes back and forth. So if somebody's able to steal the phone or see that connection, they won't know what your user ID is. Kind of nice, but again, if you're intercepting the whole conversation, you can still reuse it. You don't know what the user ID is. But that makes it hard to reuse it for a web purpose, at least, because you won't have a user ID. Unless, of course, they steal the encrypted user ID, they steal the password, they log in on a phone, and they see the user ID reflected back on the app. Now they can take the password of the user ID they just found. So it's all how you do it. You can pit it pretty easily a lot of times. So credentials, obviously they have to be stored on the phone somewhere. How are they being stored? One of the big attacks here is, again, I keep talking about an unlocked device. Find a phone sitting at a table at Starbucks, hook it up to a connector. I was about to say 30-pin connector, it's not that anymore. Hook it up to a connector, hook it up to your laptop, launch an application, jump straight in and say, okay, here's the sandbox, pull out the data files, pull out the preferences, whatever, you've got passwords. Extract the credentials, now you're logged into the guy's account. You get around this by using the keychain. That's what it's designed for. It's there to be a secure place to store passwords, to store tokens. If possible, it's good to store the user ID there as well, but a lot of times you use the user ID so many different times in the app, it doesn't make a lot of sense to keep it hidden. This attack also, and I think I mentioned this towards the beginning, has got a lot more difficult with iOS 8.3. It used to be that if a phone was unlocked, you could connect to it and access the sandbox, the actual data storage of any application on the phone. And under 8.3, that changed, and you can no longer do that. Even if the phone's unlocked, even if it's a trusted computer that's been synced into it, you can't get any of that data. That might change, I don't know, but that makes a lot of the attacks that rely on stealing data off an online phone a lot harder. As a matter of fact, there's actually a good blog post came out just today that described that and some of the other issues that forensics analysts are having with 8.3, and just how they used to be able to run all these different things and get data off of the phone, and it's just so much more difficult under 8.3 to the point where if a phone is locked, you could still extract data on a trusted computer. That's how when when your phone is still locked and you put it on your computer to sync in iTunes, it'll still sync because there's a key that's stored on the computer. If you steal that key off the computer, For example, if you're in an office environment, you just log into your office mate's computer, because it's all one domain, steal their key, now you can extract the data from their phone because you've got their parent key. Under 8.3, if the phone has been rebooted, even that won't work. So they've definitely made this a lot tighter. But it's still best practice not to put things on the file system. The keychain is the best place to put it. It's very hard to extract. You need a jailbroken device to get into the keychain and read other apps' data. Or you need the iTunes backup password, because you should always encrypt your backups. So if you've got the iTunes backup password, you've got the phone that's unlocked, you can sync it with a machine, then you can at least back it up and you can browse the backups that way and extract keychain data. But it's a pain in the neck. It's not something the attacker's going to be able to do, find a loose unlocked phone at Starbucks, because they won't have the backup password. Looking at the keychain, I found 8 usernames, 17 tokens, and 4 passwords. Out of 38 apps I'm looking at, I found 4 passwords stored in the keychain. It's not a lot. Also found a lot of other information. I found some preferences, I found some push tokens, I found a lot of credentials for third-party services like Twitter or Crashlytics, stuff like that. Less safe places to store things. There's the preferences file on the phone, which is just a property list. It just says here's the different things, the user ID, their sounds are on, volume is 5, whatever. There's all the different preferences. Almost half the apps stored a username in there. One app actually stored the password there. And again, when I did this, it was trivial to connect up, and that's the first thing you look for is the preferences app. There it is. Look inside it. There's the username and password. A lot of data gets stored in an HTTP cache, depending on the API that's used and how you can access it. A lot of data gets stored there in that cache, so you find an awful lot of URLs, header and post data. 11 had a password or token in the HTTP caches. A handful of apps had data that I could find in cookies, and then several apps had tokens, and even one app had a password in just generic files in the sandboxes, library documents folders. So just places where it's storing apps. A lot of times an app will have like a SQLite folder in the documents folder within the app sandbox, and once they've got a password there. So those are the first 2 passes, looking at the network, looking at the authentication and storage. Third pass, sometime later, leaving the apps kind of alone for a while, I came back and launched them all again, intercepted them all, looked at the login. I didn't see anything really significantly different. Mostly I was just making sure I didn't miss anything. It was a chance to really verify everything. And then I deleted the root CA cert. So now the connection to Burke was untrusted again. And I ran through the whole list of apps again just to see if anything was different. If maybe the certificate errors we got before were only for the initial login. After that, it just continued merrily along. And fortunately, they all behaved the same as well. Some looked like they were working because it's connecting to local data, cache data. But then as you got a little bit farther into the app, it would stop working. They all still had the terrible user error messages. That didn't change. So this is just to make sure that they're always checking the certificate, which they were. So that was reassuring. So to summarize everything, out of all the different apps for the initial check, 34 apps refused to work with the bad cert. That was good. 1 didn't care, 1 used HTTP, and 4 were pinned. Out of 40 apps that I started with, only 4 used certificate pin. One of those was a podcast app. So go figure. None of the bank apps, none of the healthcare apps. I think one of the pinned apps was a work-related app for like employee data. One was, I think, a travel-related app. I don't remember what the 4th one was. For initial authentication, 25 of them sent data in the post parameters. 1 sent obfuscated data in the post, like a gzip. 2 of them appear to send encrypted data in the post. 2 sent data as URL parameters, and 7 of them sent data as HTTP headers. So, I mean, this doesn't really mean a whole lot other than it would be nice if they didn't send passwords in plain text, but you need a lot more back and forth to avoid that. The disturbing part is sending passwords in the user ID and the URL parameters, because those might be cached, they might be collected in different places. You want to keep that kind of sensitive information out of the URL. Just good one. So ongoing session authentication, 2 of them continually sent the user ID and password with every request. So there was always a user ID password every time. So all you need to do is intercept 1 packet successfully. You got their login. And it's not just a token that you can only use until it expires. It's their actual password you can use forever. Because, of course, nobody changes passwords. 7 of them had some kind of dynamic token, something like OAuth 1.0 or a PKI, where they're either one-time use or they're somewhere other sign related to the data and request. 28 of them used some kind of fixed token that was just a token that would always work. And most of these went through HTTP headers, a few in the post body, and a few of these tokens went as URL parameters. Again, not good to have those in the URL. Not as bad for a token, but still not good. And after restarting 4 applications, resent the user ID and password. 20 of them sent the token, 5 asked the user to, okay, that's what it's looking for. 5 asked for the user to provide their password when they log back in if they haven't used it for a while. And 1 asked for both user ID and password, stored nothing locally. It would have a session token if you could use it for a while, but once that token expired or you forced the app to quit, you'd have to completely log in again. And then finally wrapping up, we had the credential storage. I won't go through the whole thing here. 6 applications didn't store any passwords or tokens at all. But remember, at least one of those asked for your user ID and passwords. Those were the ones there. The passwords that I did find were split between the file system and the keychain. I found more tokens on the file system than I found in the keychain. People just aren't using the keychain. They're just sticking it on the disk. And some fun things. 1 good warning, 1 encrypted user ID, 1 encrypted password delivery. Well, 1 obvious, definite encrypted password delivery. Another one that I believe was encrypted. I couldn't dig. A couple that had encrypted data. A couple that appeared to have certificate-based sessions. 1 I knew, and another one I suspected was cert-based. So really, what it's all coming down to, the point of things like this is not so much to say we're hopeless, these are bad. It's to realize what's good, what's bad, and make suggestions and help people write better apps. So the suggestions I have, the things that are good, is store everything in the keychain. Passwords definitely, tokens almost certainly, and if you can, user IDs as well. The less information that's available to the attacker, the better. You should work to avoid leakage to the cache and the cookie files, and have unique tokens for session renewed authentication. So if you've got a session token, it would be good if that's tied to the app on that device rather than just the user ID, so that the user can then revoke access for that phone if it's stolen, for example. Advantages of this, you can't extract the credentials if you're storing them in the keychain. User can revoke the device tokens. But it's still not perfect because the initial auth can still be intercepted. You're still sending the password at some point. Session tokens can be reused. It's a little bit better would be don't store the password, store a hash of the password. Ideally, that would be something a little bit more complex. So you've got hash the password, add some kind of unique nonce and timestamp and hash that whole thing. And then that's what you send up. And the server would then look to see if the nonce matches the next one they expect. So if it sees a token that comes up that uses a nonce that's already been used once, it says no. So you end up with and that's a cryptographic term, nonce. That's if people don't know, that's just a general random number. It doesn't really mean anything. But the idea there being that that's something that's unique. So if it gets a token that comes up that's really old because the timestamp is old, because you'll have to send the nonce and the timestamp alongside the hash. So the server gets the overall hash, looks at the timestamp, it's too old, it says no. Looks at the nonce, says I've seen this before, it says no. So that'll help to reduce the potential for somebody replaying an attack, replaying the token. So if they attack it, they grab a token, they can't use it again. But there is still that disadvantage that I said before. If an attacker is able to intercept the request and stop the request, they can basically grab a valid token, block the request, user responds with a new token that goes through, but they've still got a valid token off to the side. They can use that elsewhere to send a new request. For example, if they send a password reset. So the best thing is if all apps have a one-time token And not only is the token based on the things I said before, the password and some nonsense, but also based on hashing the request. So now the token has to match the actual request that's sent. So if the attacker grabs it, the only thing they can do is replay the exact packet that you just sent. So you can't reuse the token, you can't modify or force request. But it's a lot more complicated. And for this and the one before, the server has to remember all the recent nonsense that we use for any given user. So it's a little bit more complicated, but it's definitely a lot stronger.
Does anyone actually do that?
There's a couple that kind of do that. There's, and I think I mentioned a little bit later, there's an application spec, SAML, Structured Security Assertion Markup Language. And it's an OASIS spec, and don't ask me what OASIS stands for, I'm lucky I remember what SAML stands for. But that uses something very, very much like this. The one app that I've seen probably 3 or 4 years ago that used that sequence and actually took your password. I think it ran it through PKDF2 for like 10,000 iterations using SHA-2, and then it attached a nonce and timestamp, and then it used that sort of approach, which is great, but oh my God, if you think the OWASP spec is terrible, when you look at things like SAML and stuff, it's even more complicated. This is all XML, it's all, it's probably too much document for, for this stuff. But it is, conceptually it's simple, but if you go to one of the standards, it's a pain in the neck, which is why so few people do this. But it is definitely the most secure way I think you can do it, aside from going to a full out SSL cert. Which I mentioned right here. Even better is if you're using one-time tokens as I just described. And if you've also got some additional public key for the server and you're encrypting all the stuff on top of the regular SSL, sign everything with a client-based certificate. Things like that should be damn near impossible for an attacker to do anything with. It can't be absolutely impossible, but you're getting very, very high bars at that point. Extracting data from the keychain still is a risk. Obviously, if the highest security is going to store that, the user enters the password every time they launch the app. And that's what I have with like the banking apps. I've never seen a bank app that stores the password. You always have to re-enter the password. Because that's still the most secure you're going to get. Of course, if you make the mobile app unbreakable, then they'll just attack the web app. And a lot of these kinds of things that you can do on mobile apps, you can't do on the web. You're not going to be able to do the really advanced tokens and one-time tokens and hashes for the web app. So there's the OASIS SAML, talks about the timestamp, nonce, all those things. I've only ever seen this once. It's a simple concept, but the spec is just really scary. OAuth 1.0 is a great thing to do, but again, it's really complicated. It's weird. I was criticizing the comment before about it's too strange, so we're just going to simplify it and trust SSL. And I kind of laughed at that. But yeah, it is complicated. Every time I do anything with OAuth, I spend about 3 days trying to remember how it works before I can get it to work. OAuth 2 is much more simplified, but it doesn't have nearly as many features, so it's not quite as strong. So they're all kind of trade-offs. So in general, the apps that I saw were not bad, but they could be better. Again, of the 38 apps which made it all the way through this review, 12 only had a minor issue, and I'll describe what I consider major or minor. 6 had at least one major. No apps had no issues at all. I just didn't find anything that was perfect. And most of these could be fixed with just a few crazy tricks. It's one neat trick. Again, these are not complete assessments, so really trying to say are these good apps or these bad apps isn't entirely fair because I was just looking at such a narrow vector. But if I really wanted to categorize the issues that I saw to break them out to the problems, I'm calling low severity, I'm calling things where passwords are stored insecurely or the app doesn't use cert pinning. I'd like to see everybody use cert pinning from a security standpoint. I'd like to see everybody use cert pinning. From somebody who tests apps, I hate cert pinning because it's a pain in the neck for me. But it would be much better if everybody did that. But it's not a standard practice. That's why it's kind of called low right now. But really, that should be down here in sort of medium. So most of the apps didn't use cert pinning. Almost all of them stored user writing insecurely. Not necessarily a big thing, but it's still has to keep it hidden. Things that I call medium, were when credentials or password tokens are passed as URL parameters and get URL parameter. 21 apps stored a token badly, so you could pull it off the device, but again, that's reduced in severity now with 8.3. And 2 apps send credentials every single time and call all those sort of medium issues. And then 2 apps either didn't use TLS or ignored the cert errors. That's definitely a high error, a high vulnerability. And 4 of them stored the password, stored the actual password text on the device, but in an insecure fashion. There were 12 apps that didn't have medium and high, so 12 apps that were only in this category. And there wasn't a single app that had nothing, that had none of those. So the top 5 suggestion is use TLS, but take extra hash generation. If you're doing any kind of hashes, use things like PBKDF2 or scrypt or bcrypt, HMAX. Don't just use MD5. Don't use MD5 of nonsense, something else, because somebody can extend it. There's attacks you can do to take a valid hash and add more data to the end of it and still retain it as a valid hash. So sometimes you can use that. If you're being clever and you're putting session data inside a token, like is the user an admin, you can actually add stuff to the end of a hash token to make them an admin. So you should use strong hashes. Avoid leakage of data to the caches into the cookies. If possible, use one-time tokens. Even better if you can actually tie it to a hash to the request so it's signed and specific to that request, and therefore not replayable. So it's kind of easy to more difficult. Although really the cookie leakage could probably, that's pretty high, but a little bit easier. Future work, I'd love to see a broader cross-section studied, but there's only so many apps that I really feel like buying or installing, because some of them I have to buy. And also, realistically, if you're not using the app a lot, you're not going to get a good feel for what it's doing. You launch it, maybe you log in and create an account. But if you're not really using the app a lot, you may not be able to go deep in it and actually see a lot of the exchange of data. Focus maybe on 1 or 2 app types, maybe just grab all the banking apps and look at a survey of all the bank apps. Things like that can come out every now and then. But it may be difficult to get accounts, especially for banks. So that's the hard part about doing this test for all kinds of bank accounts. So now you need an account in every bank. I'd like to also, I mentioned earlier, let's see general security surveys, third-party analytics collection, stuff like that. And then ultimately, we need better best practices recommendations. And there's OWASP based docs and things like that. One of the things I say working on, but I haven't had a chance to really do it, is I've actually tried to write a paper to go with this, and there's a short paper that's going to go in the ShmooCon proceedings, but I want to do a more formal paper that really goes into a lot of the methodology, tries to present some of the anonymized data and actual best practices. So some of these things where I say, avoid caching, to be able to actually provide examples of how to do that. So that's something that I need to do. If somebody else does it before me, great. So, yes.
So we, our chapter, we do these hack nights, not every month, but every other month. And Brian, one of the chapter leads, runs it. I think one of the things that might be interested by the chapter would be a hack night on, trying to understand how to learn, not break, but to look into mobile apps. Would that be something that you might be interested in assisting us with?
I could maybe, it's not easy to, I'm trying to think how to describe this. To get started on doing any of this stuff, most of the work that I do is on jailbroken devices. So number one, you got to get a phone and jailbreak it, which means it's got to be an older OS, because I don't think 8.3 has been jailbroken. And then there's different apps and so on and so forth. So it's not necessarily hard to get started, but there's definitely a barrier to entry there. And then there's so many different things that you can look at, so many different bits and pieces, but there's certainly potential there for talks from me or a whole lot of other people could give the talk. To even just describe, as an example, describe the sandbox. An app's data folder, here's the library and where things are there, and here's the documents folder and what things are there and what they all mean and what kind of data can be leaked. There's certainly potential there. We've done a class for a customer for teaching sort of iOS app assessment. We actually did some app breaking and going a little bit deeper using apps to actually modify the runtime as it was running, things like that. And it was about a day and a half for iOS and a day and a half for Android. So there's a lot of material there.
Could you potentially do it in a virtual machine? Because I know some, like with Android, they have virtual machines available for different OSs. I'm not sure if iOS is the same.
No, it's not. It's all, it's not so much that it's ARM-based as that the underlying OS and firmware aren't available on the desktop. When you're building apps and Xcode, and you want to run it with a simulator, it is a simulator, it's not an emulator. So I don't want to get sort of technical. There's a semantic difference that is subtle and weird, and I don't want to go into. But what it's doing is it's actually compiling, not for the phone, but compiles a version to run on x86 in a simulator, and it's connecting to different libraries altogether. So everything's completely different. It runs like the phone app, but it's not the phone app by standing on scratch. So that would be great. And every now and then somebody comes up and says, "How do you build an emulator so you can do all the iPhone stuff and just go over?" It's not.
Yeah, if you ever do it for Android, then you can emulator for it.
For what?
Android.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Android absolutely, but not for iOS.
Speaking of Androids, do you have any comparative insight into the Android app space?
I don't. I've really avoided Android, not from any particular reason other than I'm just not an Android fan. I don't want to sit here and trash Android. People like it. Fantastic. It's just not my thing. And so I've really tried to focus on
this sort of stuff that you're aware of?
I don't know that I've seen something quite to this level where it's, you know, such a narrow focus on a broad spectrum. But every now and then, every, you know, few months, every 6 months, whatever, somebody will come out with a survey of such and such, and they'll look at some kind of app or some kind of issue across multiple apps, things like that. And I'm not sure I've seen anything really this focused on just authentication for Android. Yes.
When you tested the first phase of testing, when you were testing to see if any of the applications rejected a connection with an unknown cert, did you forge a cert, or did you just use Burp's default cert without trusting it?
I just use the default cert. So Burp is forging the cert for me.
Well, right.
But then I did not trust the Burp's root.
Yeah.
So the phone sees the forged cert, but it doesn't trust it because it's forged.
Yeah. And I guess very quickly on the second one, there was one app that you mentioned where it stored a masked user ID.
Yes.
That app, was that a financial app by any chance?
Yes.
I don't know.
I've seen a lot that store some kind of mask ID, but I haven't really dug to see how they do it. But this one particular one did it.
We'll have a conversation out of bounds about these guys.
Okay. Yes.
So sometimes the browser stores the user ID and the password. Your study didn't address that, but
Right.
do you have any comments on how safely the browsers tend to keep such things?
There are so many, well, not so many browsers. There's maybe 3 at this point in matter. But there's lots of different browsers, lots of different versions of browsers.
Let's take Chrome.
Different. Well, but what I was going to say is between the different versions and the different platforms, and then even the different systems they run on, they're all doing it differently. And for a while, it was accepted wisdom that, oh my God, this is horrible. How could you ever want your app to store your password? And so everybody always said, don't do that. And it's still something we do in all of our web assessments. If we see a password field that has autocomplete set up so the browser can store it, we ding them. And it's debatable whether that's necessarily still valid or not, because either some apps don't do it anyway, or some apps ignore the autocomplete, and you can ignore the autocomplete off and they'll store it anyway. So it's kind of a wild west out there as to what they're doing. I haven't looked that deeply. I don't trust it myself. If for no other reason than I just like to know they're all in one place. So I use the third-party password management. I just store everything in there, and that ties into all my browsers. And I just click a little one password link and say log in for this site, and it populates. That works there, and works in all the browsers on my desktop, works on my phone. So it's not so much because I'm not trusting the browser, which I don't, but it's more for convenience that this works everywhere that I do that.
And you do trust it.
I trust that password manager, yes. They've done there's 1Password, there's LastPass, there's a few others that are out there that have generally had pretty good reviews. 1Password I like because it was iOS focused at first, so that kind of fell into my requirements range. But also the developers are very open with how the technology works at a very deep technological level. You can go on their blog and read some really detailed descriptions of how they derive their master key with PBKDF and why they use AES 128 versus 256 things like that. So they're very open and all that. It may not be perfect, but I think it's strong enough for me anyway.
Thanks much.
Sure. Anything else? All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you again for everyone coming out. As Mike said, we have John Townend set up to speak next month on a more exploitation focused talk. So it might be a little bit on the more technical side, but should be very exciting nonetheless. Thank you again to Blue Canopy and all the folks from Blue Canopy for coming out and sponsoring the event, the meetup tonight. And hope to see everyone next month. Thank you.